What's up, YouTube? I'm Robert. This is the Biker Channel, and today we have my my Ari Wasatch Peak hardtail. I put $6,000 worth of upgrades on this thing, so you don't have to. But realistically, the reason I'm doing this on a $1,000 bike is so that we can talk about what those upgrades are and whether or not they're good for your bike, whether it's a $1,000 bike or an $8,000 bike. Let's just talk about some of the upgrades that I did and whether or not I feel like they're worth it. Like I just said, I only paid $899 for this bike, and I think out the door it was $1,000. There were a few things that no matter what, I was not gonna ride the bike that way. And one of them was having a dropper. Typically I run a 240 millimeter dropper, but because of the size of this frame, I shimmed down a 200 to 175. Unfortunately, I still felt like the seat was a hair too high. Because of that, I decided to spend damn close to the price of the bike on a wireless access dropper that was $170. All this just so I could have the dropper slam to give me as much room as possible to move around on the bike. Honestly, the access dropper worked perfectly for me, but let's be real, it's just not worth it. Let's just say on average around $200 is a really good dropper. And basically what are you gonna end up with? Just an extra cord on the cockpit. So if a couple $100 more is worth not having an extra cable on your cockpit, maybe it's worth it. Or maybe it's just for the bling factor. I also really enjoyed the way the seat adjusts, how you tighten this and loosen this clamp. It's one of my biggest pet peeves with bikes, and this honestly was just dialed. While we're talking about the seat, the one that came with my bike, I really thought was gonna be awesome. Just looking at it, it looked like it was gonna be what I like. However, as soon as I got on the bike, I knew it was a different story. Seats are a different preference for everybody. This is the Specialized Power Comp Mimic. Originally, this was made for women, but eventually people were riding it from both sexes, and we all found out this thing's super comfortable. It has a super short nose on it, so it makes it really easy to move the bike around. It doesn't get caught on your shorts, so besides that and the comfort, this is the perfect saddle. I run it on all my bikes. I think the saddle was definitely worth the upgrade, but I will say this, if you're a brand new cyclist, don't assume that your saddle sucks right out the gate, because a lot of times you just have to get used to riding, and let's just call it the butt calluses. They need to develop before you go buying new seats. All right, let's talk about these. These are the aluminum handlebars that came on the bike, and it also had this stem, which is pretty long. This is an extra large, and the reach just felt a little bit long to me, so I shortened it up on the new one, and I also moved from an aluminum bar to a carbon bar. As I rode this bike with the carbon bars on it, it really was an eye-opener to me on how much of a difference it made. It totally dampened the ride a bit, and it didn't feel as harsh on my hands. I truly enjoyed the way that felt, and I feel like upgrading to these one-up carbon bars is definitely worth the money. It changed the ride a lot, at least the ride characteristics of how much it was like kind of beating into my shoulders and my hands, and I felt a lot more comfortable, and so to me, I would definitely do that. Grips are a personal preference thing, but I'll tell you this much. If you're not using lock-on grips, go ahead and spend the money. It's probably one of the cheapest upgrades that you can do on a bike. It keeps the grips from twisting and turning on you, and it also makes changing them out super easy. So for a low cost of about $30 or less, you can get a set of grips that are locked on and maybe add some color, a little bling to the bike, and that's always fun too. When I first test rode this bike, I was using these SRAM level brakes, and I thought they were pretty good. Between that and me being lazy, I just didn't swap them out. But I will say, as I rode this bike more, I definitely noticed how much these brakes suck. There's a couple of things at play here. I'm a really big guy. There's only a 180 millimeter rotor in the front and a 160 rotor in the back. I'm typically riding 203s on my hardtail and 220s on my full suspension bikes. So definitely a difference in braking power. Personally, I feel like braking is one of the most important upgrades, because it really changes how fast you can come into things and how well you can modulate your braking through technical situations. I wouldn't hesitate on upgrading your brakes no matter what bike you have, unless you already have something at an XT level or higher. Definitely consider it. It's not too expensive, and you'll notice a big difference in the performance. I also noticed with these brakes how much extra metal they have and how little adjustment they have compared to the other brakes that I'm used to using. So you can tell just by looking at them, they're definitely a lot heavier, and it's nice to have those extra adjustments to really kind of dial things into the way that you like them. If it was me, I would upgrade the brakes, but it honestly probably wouldn't be the first thing I went after. The first thing I would go after is this fork. So this is the fork that came on the bike. It really handled well, but I'll tell you, even though the lockout on this bike was legitimate, it was basically a rigid fork at that point. I did enjoy that part, but you could definitely tell that the way that it was handling the chatter just wasn't quite as good as the Fox 36 that I put on there. Even though this fork has similar adjustments as that fork, it just didn't feel like it dialed it in quite the same way. And this also has a smaller stanchion on it than that one, so it felt a little bit more solid to me. Overall, when I was riding, it definitely made a big difference. Another thing I'd be concerned with is how much oil is on the stanchion. That's after one ride. It makes me feel like the longevity of this fork is probably not going to be the greatest. If you could pick one up used like I did, it's definitely worth it. I only paid a couple $100 for that, and compared to this, it felt a million times better. And I also added another 20 millimeters of suspension, so that made it a little more fun as well. Any of you that have been following this channel for a while know I use these Pedaling Innovation pedals. They have a super big platform, and I have a size 12 foot. And I'll tell you, every time I've tried a different kind of pedal, they just don't feel as good. The support on this is amazing, and I think because there's so many extra pins on there, the grip is like, it's just awesome. I just love the grip on it. If you're into flat pedals and you're okay with people just telling you about how big they are and they look silly, then buy a set of these. Most people think that you get a ton more rock strikes. You do not. I personally can't speak highly enough about the Pedaling Innovation pedals. And if you decide to pick a set up, use the link and show more. It doesn't cost you any more, but it helps out the channel. So thanks if you do that. I also upgraded the crank from the one that was in here to this XX Carbon. And in doing that, I changed the bottom bracket as well. And I'll tell you this right out the gate. The old style bottom bracket that's in there just sucks to work on, and having the newer style dub, it's just so much easier. It has a self-extracting nut in it. It's been so long since I used a crank puller, it took me like 15 minutes to find it. Personally, I'd upgrade to a dub bottom bracket and crank just so I didn't have to deal with this again. Even though this is carbon, I couldn't tell much of a difference. What I could tell a difference in was these are 165 compared to the 175s that were in there. And I don't care what anybody else says on the internet, you can definitely tell it's a little bit harder to pedal when the cranks are a lot shorter. That's just my personal opinion, but what I've noticed is when I'm in the Eagle, it'll feel a little bit harder when I'm on a bike with 165s than it does on a bike with 170s or 175s. So take it how you will. As far as it being carbon or aluminum, I personally can't tell a difference. I don't know if you could either. In the past, I've bought a lot of carbon cranks that are takeoffs from somebody that bought a bike that didn't have the carbon cranks that they liked, and they upgraded it, or maybe they switched to aluminum because they don't trust carbon. I don't know. I've bought a bunch of those used online for a lot cheaper than what you can pay retail, and in that case, I think it's probably worth it. Just out of the box, spending $500, $600, $700 on a pair of cranks, you're not gonna notice anything but your bike maybe being a little lighter. Another thing you may notice that I spent way too much money on is this carbon bottle cage. Is it worth it? Not at all. It's nominally lighter than a other bottle cage. The only thing I do say about these is if you're riding a full suspension bike, having one that's a side load like this is really key. Definitely worth it in the aspect of a side load, but on a hardtail, I still have to use a strap to keep a bottle in there. Whenever it's getting really like janky and fast, they'll pop out. So I usually use just a little rubber strap around the bottle. I also upgraded the drivetrain. I use this high-end cassette. Realistically, the only reason I paid that extra money, it was not because it weighed so much less, but because I wanted this oil slick on it. Same goes with the chain. I think it's really an expensive upgrade that's just not doing anything but making your bike lighter, or maybe appealing to you wanting to make it look a certain way. But other than that, as far as riding, I think the GX level stuff is really good. That's why I use the GX level derailleur. In my opinion, it works just as good as the top of the line one. It's just a little heavier. Some people may argue maybe because it's a little more burly, it might be able to last a little longer, take a little more abuse. That's a possibility. It's definitely a lot cheaper to replace if you break, because I've broken one of these before, so that's a drag. Personally, I hate screwing around with the cables, and this GX axis is awesome that way. You don't have to feed it through the frame. You don't have to adjust it along the way as the cable stretches or whatever. The only thing I do have to remember is charging the batteries. So if you're very forgetful, maybe this isn't for you. One thing I will mention, tell you what, I'm gonna get a little spoiled using this axis though, because the one thing I hate about the transmission is you just can't dump through gears like you can with the regular axis. And it's definitely apparent today. One thing I like to mention about the Axis system is there is a battery in this remote, and although it lasts a really long time, the moment when it dies on you, it could be pretty crappy. Fortunately, when mine died on me, it died in the parking lot, so I could just drive back to the gas station that was nearby and buy another battery, and maybe keep an extra one of those coin style, I think it's a 2032 batteries, and put it maybe in your pack or something like that. There is the ability to push the button and manually shift, so you can get it out of the gear that you were in as long as that battery is charged too, but overall it's really cumbersome, so keep that in mind. All right, last but not least, let's talk about the tires. I upgraded the tires from what was on there, the Kenda tires that were very similar pattern to this Maxxis Recon, which I really like. And to be honest, I think they were kind of a wash. The tread pattern was very similar and they both felt really good. So I think upgrading your tires, that's a personal preference thing. Totally up to you. It's kind of a drag that you got to spend like close to 200 bucks just to try something else, but it is what it is. Maybe you can find somebody selling some slightly used ones online so it doesn't sting just as much, but at the end of the day, the only way you're going to know what tires you like is to go out and try different tires. On the other hand, the carbon wheels were a huge upgrade. I think even more so because I'm a big guy, and being a big dude, I like the wheels to feel not flexy, and that tends to happen on lower end wheels. On top of that, I love the way that the carbon is stiff, but it's still compliant. I think it helps kind of remove some of that extra chatter feeling from the trail. So does the CushCore that I have inside of these tires. Once again, as a big guy, CushCore, it's like a no-brainer. What it does is it stiffens the sidewall so that you can have lower pressure in here, so that way when you're turning around corners and stuff, you won't feel that tire kind of roll over. It also helps dampen some of that trail chatter, which on a hardtail makes a huge difference. I know some people only use it on the back, not on the front. They think of it only as rim protection, and if you talk to the guys at the company, it's really a suspension product, and it's truly run best if you're running on both tires. I personally don't really care about the weight. I think what it does to my riding, I really enjoy. So the bottom line is, CushCore, it's worth it. I feel like carbon wheels are an upgrade that's probably best suited for whenever you're purchasing the bike. So that way it's kind of like wrapped into the whole price of the bike rather than going out and building them later. Whatever you do when you're building a set of wheels, don't go cheap on the hubs. These hubs right here are definitely not in line with the same quality that I'm used to with Onyx or Project 321. The engagement has messed me up a couple of times where I try to quick twitch backpedal over something and it's just, the power's not there, and then it makes me mess up. It honestly is like a little bit of a reality check of showing me how much my equipment really helps out. These Project 321 hubs have a lot of engagement. Unfortunately, I built a set of wheels once with cheap hubs thinking, it'll be all right. I read all the reviews, and sure enough, within a year, I totally blew the hubs up and needed to replace them. So then not only did I have to buy new hubs, but I had to pay somebody to rebuild my wheels as well. There you have it. That's about $6,000 worth of upgrades that I did to this bike. And I will say one thing in closing. If you don't really like the bike that you're riding, like it doesn't feel right to you, you probably won't be able to upgrade it into making it feel good for you. So even though I spent $6,000 on this bike, there were things about the geometry that I wasn't super impressed with whenever I first rode it. And although the ride got better, I still wasn't super impressed with how this thing rode. So if you find yourself thinking, hey, I can upgrade this old bike to have all these new top of the line parts, it'll make it just as good as the new bike and I can slowly buy my way into it, it's probably not gonna work out that way. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know a lot of it's just my opinion, and if you feel differently or you want me to clarify something, just shoot it down there in the comments. I'll be looking forward to talking with you about it. Until next time, remember, it only takes a bike to be a biker. Get out and be one.